What if your ancestors believed they could shape the voice of God itself? What if they told you that your dreams, your thoughts, even the children you might one day bear were not yours to claim, but the fulfillment of a vision older than memory? And what if you discovered that this destiny wasn't a miracle from heaven, but a design, meticulously bred into you by generations who believed they could create a prophet? There are stories, some whispered in dusty archives, some buried in private diaries, some locked away by churches that would rather the past stay silent, of families that saw prophecy not as a miracle but as a craft. They treated bloodlines like scripture, marrying cousins, handpicking spouses, and guarding every birth with the obsession of farmers cultivating a rare and delicate seed. To them, prophecy was not random. It was an inheritance, and they would keep it pure at any cost. But what happens when purity becomes poison? To understand why anyone would try to engineer a prophet, you must step into a world where visions were currency. In medieval Europe, in Ottoman courts, in the forgotten valleys of the American frontier, visions were not just spiritual experiences. They were power. The prophet was not merely a holy figure, but a political weapon. One vision could crown a king, unseat a ruler, or send entire armies to their deaths. And if a family could guarantee a prophet every generation, they could rule without soldiers, without armies, without even stepping onto the battlefield. But what kind of mind believes that the will of heaven can be manufactured? Some point to the 15th century Gudial family of Aragon, whose daughters were famed for entering holy trances from childhood. Marriage into the Gudials was a coveted prize among the minor nobility, but every union was arranged with an unnerving precision. Brides and grooms chosen from a web of cousins, always within 2 degrees of blood. Chroniclers hint at an unspoken rule: the vision must not be diluted. And when the same peculiar features began to appear in their children, pale skin, sharp eyes, a strange stillness even in infancy, the family took it as a sign of divine approval. But was it really divinity at work, or the genetic echo of generations trapped in a loop? In the deserts of Yemen, oral traditions speak of the Al-Hadi clan, a family that claimed descent from a line of dreaming imams. Their nocturnal visions were said to reveal the outcomes of battles, the deaths of rulers, even the timing of rain. For over 2 centuries, they married only into 3 other families, all with their own mystic reputations. But the record turned strange. Some descendants spoke of visions filled with heavenly light, while others described scenes of unbearable terror. Visions they could not control, voices that never stopped, nights when they awoke screaming in languages they had never learned. Were these the marks of chosen souls, or symptoms of minds collapsing under an inherited weight? In 19th century America, the Second Great Awakening birthed not only revivals and tent meetings, but a wave of radical sects determined to bring about the end times. Some communities, like the little-known River Zion colony in Illinois, went further, believing they could prepare vessels for the Spirit by raising children in total isolation from the corruption of the outside world. Court records from a later trial mention a chilling phrase used by the colony's elders: "The line must speak." Families were instructed to marry only within the community, sometimes to people they had known since infancy. Their firstborn children were subjected to fasting rituals before they could even walk. And when one girl began to speak in voices not her own, the elders declared the experiment a success. But who, exactly, was she speaking for? Again and again there is the same pattern, the fortress mentality. Families or sects wall themselves in, physically and spiritually, until the outside world becomes an enemy and the bloodline becomes the only trusted currency. In 17th century Scotland, the Glen family sealed themselves inside a coastal estate, claiming the world beyond their gates was too profane for the next prophet to walk upon. Visitors described hallways lined with portraits of pale, wide-eyed children, all painted with the same unnerving gaze. The Glens rarely left, except to arrange marriages with distant cousins across the sea. For them, the family tree was not a record, it was a map to the divine. But when your God lives in your blood, what happens when the blood begins to turn on itself? Imagine being told from birth that you are a vessel, not a person. Your dreams are dissected, your faintest illnesses interpreted as omens, your friendships outside the family forbidden. For some, this grooming produced conviction. For others, it produced collapse. In the isolated Carver sect of New England, children chosen as speakers were woken at midnight to record their dreams, sometimes in freezing barns, their small hands clutching quills. One surviving diary from an 11-year-old girl named Ruth contains a final entry written in a trembling hand. The dream is too loud. I wish it would stop. Was this the voice of a prophet, or the plea of a prisoner in her own mind? In nearly every case, there comes a moment where devotion slips into domination, when the search for a prophet becomes an excuse for control. Marriages are no longer choices, children become experiments, and faith becomes a breeding chart. Sometimes it ends quietly with the family line fading into obscurity. Other times, it ends in fire, like the night the River Zion colony burned after whispers of rebellion spread among its youngest members. The official cause was listed as accidental, but survivors speak of a deliberate spark. Did someone decide that the line had spoken enough? And yet, among the wreckage there are stories that keep the obsession alive. A boy in the Glen estate who predicted a shipwreck 3 days before it happened. A Goodyeall daughter who foresaw a plague sweeping through Aragon, and lived to watch her vision unfold. An Al-Hadi elder whose last words were said to predict the rise of an empire. Were these coincidences, lucky guesses, or evidence that the bloodlines had succeeded? Some researchers claim these families didn't disappear at all. They say the lines still exist, hidden in plain sight, their descendants in politics, in business, in quiet corners of religious orders. A few whisper that the breeding hasn't stopped, only shifted underground into circles where science now replaces faith, mapping genes instead of reading omens. And if they could truly breed prophecy into a person, what would they do with them in our world? So we return to the question that started it all. If prophecy can be cultivated, can it ever truly be sacred? And if you met someone today who claimed to be born of such a line, would you listen to what they had to say, or would you run? They called their estate La Casa Silenciosa, the silent house that it stood on a low hill outside the Catalonian town of Aragon, its thick stone walls blotting out the noise of the world, its iron gates always locked from the inside. By day the wind would pass through the olive trees and rattle the heavy shutters. By night only one window ever showed a light, the uppermost chamber where the chosen daughters were said to dream. The Goodyealls claimed that their gift began with a woman named Isabet, born in 1412. According to local legend, she was found wandering in the fields at the age of 7, her dress soaked with morning dew, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. When she finally spoke, she told the villagers she had seen the Virgin Mary herself, standing in a garden made of glass. It was the first of many visions. But unlike other visionaries, Isabet's trances came with a pattern. Her daughters and her daughters' daughters would have them too. Was it truly heaven touching the earth, or a trick of the blood? As the years passed, the Goodyealls turned the visions into their inheritance. Marriage was not about love, it was about keeping the blood pure. Suitors were weighed not by wealth, but by their family trees. 2 cousins could marry if their lineage aligned. Strangers from outside the circle were almost never considered. Slowly, the Goodyealls began to resemble each other. The same pale skin, the same deep-set eyes, the same strangely slow, deliberate way of speaking. Was it reverence, or the side effect of a narrowing gene pool? Those who worked in the house whispered that the girls were raised differently. From the age of 5, they were taught to sleep on hard wooden beds, so the soul would not be tempted by comfort. Meals were small and simple: bread, olives, water, and fasting was common. Once a week they were led to the high chamber and told to wait for the dream. Some waited hours. Some waited days. Those who claimed to see nothing were kept longer. How many visions were born from faith, and how many from hunger and exhaustion? Records from a traveling scribe in 1486 describe one of the strangest practices. Before a marriage was approved, the chosen bride would spend 3 nights alone in the vision chamber. Each morning she would recount what she saw to the elders of the family. If her dreams were judged unworthy, lacking holy symbols, lacking signs, the match would be broken. Some women remained unmarried for life. Others disappeared from the records entirely. What happened to the ones who failed the test? The Goodyeals' reputation spread beyond Aragon. Nobility sought their blessing, bishops visited their gates, and merchants paid handsomely for the family's predictions. In one case, a Goodyeal daughter predicted a sudden illness in the royal household, and weeks later the king's cousin fell gravely ill. The coincidence made the family famous. But fame has its price. Did their influence make them more prophetic, or did those who heard their words simply shape events to fit the vision? By the late 1500s, cracks began to appear. A series of failed harvests, political unrest, and a scandal involving a cousin accused of heresy brought unwanted attention. The Inquisition, already suspicious of hereditary prophecy, began to take notice. Several members of the family were questioned, their visions scrutinized for signs of sorcery. One account describes a Goodyeal girl, only 16, who during interrogation described the inquisitor's dream from the night before, in perfect detail. Was it a lucky guess or proof of something far more unsettling? And then, as quickly as their rise began, the records go silent. The silent house remained on its hill, its gates rusting, its walls dark. No more daughters are listed in the parish books after 1621. Some say the line died out. Others claim it simply went underground, marrying into other prophetic families to hide the blood. And yet, in the archives of Barcelona, there is a curious note written in the margin of an otherwise unremarkable ledger from 1842. The line still speaks. If the Goodyeals survived, where are they now, and what? It begins with a funeral that never ended. In the winter of 1794, the people of Bracken Hollow, a tiny settlement deep in the fog-choked valleys of northern England, noticed something strange about the Ashcroft family. The patriarch Josiah Ashcroft had died suddenly at the age of 51. His coffin was built, the grave dug, the mourners gathered. But at the last moment the family locked the church doors. No burial ever took place. From that day on, no one saw Josiah's body, and no one dared to ask where it had gone. Why did the Ashcrofts keep their dead so close? The Ashcrofts claimed descent from a 14th-century mystic known only as the Widow, a woman whose visions during the Black Death had guided entire villages to survival. The family kept a relic, a small ashwood box containing what they claimed were her preserved eyes, still open to the other side. Children were told to look into the box on their 7th birthday and describe what they saw. Some screamed. Some fainted. One boy, according to a neighbor's diary, stared silently for nearly an hour before saying, "It's not her eyes anymore." What could he have meant? By the 18th century, the Ashcrofts had perfected the art of inward-looking isolation. They refused to marry anyone from more than 2 miles away. Every generation, a single child, always the eldest, was chosen as the vessel. This child would be kept apart from siblings, sleep in a locked attic room, and receive nightly dream lessons from the elders. Villagers claimed the vessels were pale, thin, and eerily quiet, their gaze always drifting to things no one else could see. Were these children touched by heaven, or broken by the weight of their family's obsession? And then there was the ritual of cold ash. Every winter solstice, the family gathered in the back garden, barefoot in the snow. A fire was lit in a stone pit, fed with bundles of dried ash branches until it burned white-hot. The vessel would kneel at the fire's edge, hold a silver bowl above the flames, and wait until the bowl was coated in a fine white powder. This ash was then mixed with water and drunk. The elders claimed it burned away the lies of the waking world. But what did it burn into their minds instead? Locals whispered about the prophecies of cold ash, cryptic warnings that sometimes saved lives and sometimes destroyed them. In 1823, the vessel predicted that the river would rise to take the church. That summer, an unexpected flood ripped through Bracken Hollow, washing away half the graveyard. But in 1836, the prophecy that 3 children will not see spring sparked panic. Families fled the valley. When spring came, no one had died, but 3 children had vanished. Did the prophecy fail, or was it fulfilled in a darker way? By the mid-1800s, the Ashcrofts had become a shadow within their own community. They rarely left the hollow. Their windows were always shuttered. The vessels were seen less and less, until eventually only rumors remained. One claimed that the last vessel had been born without a shadow. Another claimed that the ashwood box was empty, the relic taken away by strangers in the night. But perhaps the most chilling rumor was this, that Josiah Ashcroft, the patriarch who had never been buried, was still in the house, perfectly preserved, waiting to pass the visions to the next vessel. And somewhere in the damp stone halls of that house, there is said to be a locked room with a single word scratched into the wood in a trembling hand. Wait. What could be waiting there, and for whom? They say the desert keeps secrets better than the sea. The Al-Sura family had ruled their oasis for over 4 centuries, but they claimed something greater than land or wealth. They claimed their blood carried the voice of the future. According to the elders, the first of their line, Zafar ibn Musa, had been struck by a sandstorm so fierce it stripped the skin from camels and buried entire caravans. When the storm passed, Zafar stumbled into camp with eyes glowing amber and a voice that spoke in verses no one recognized. The clan believed it was the speech of angels. But was it divine inspiration, or the madness of a man who had inhaled too much of the desert's breath? From that day, the Al-Sura guarded their line with almost religious precision. Marriage outside the tribe was forbidden. Cousins wed cousins. The most promising children were fed a secret diet of saffron, figs, and boiled goat's milk mixed with powdered lapis, a strange blue mineral they claimed opened the tongue to fire. Some scholars later suspected the lapis was ground with another, far rarer stone, orpiment, an arsenic mineral. If so, how much of their prophecy was revelation, and how much was poison seeping into their veins? Witnesses from neighboring tribes spoke of the Majlis al-Anar, the gathering of fire, held once each year under the crescent moon. The chosen seer, usually a boy of 14, would be made to stand barefoot on hot coals while reciting his visions to the elders. Any stumble in the words was taken as a bad omen. The ritual scars on their feet were worn like medals, proof they had carried the fire. But were those words really glimpses of what was to come, or frantic inventions to end the agony sooner? There are accounts, always second-hand, always whispered, of visions that came true in terrible ways. In 1712, a young seer named Farid predicted that the water will run red for 7 days. 3 years later, raiders poisoned the oasis with pomegranate skins and goat blood, sending the tribe into chaos. But there were darker prophecies, the kind that sounded more like commands. One seer told the elders, a black banner must be carried into the market of Al-Khazir at dawn. The next day, a rival sheikh was found dead beneath such a banner. Did the Al-Sura predict the future, or create it? European travelers in the 19th century brought their own stories. One French cartographer claimed he saw a boy in the Al-Sura camp recite in perfect French the details of a map the man had not yet drawn. Another claimed the seer's voice was not his own, but that of an older man, deep, cracking, and unfamiliar. The cartographer fled the camp before nightfall. Could this have been some kind of trance, or was the fire-tongued boy truly a mouthpiece for something beyond himself? By the early 1900s, the family's secrecy turned to paranoia. They abandoned the oasis, moving deep into the empty quarter, where shifting sands could hide their camp for years. Contact with outsiders ceased. Traders claimed they saw strange blue smoke rising from the dunes at night, and heard voices chanting verses in languages no one could name. A few spoke of a child with eyes that burned like twin suns, a child who never blinked. If the Al-Sura line still lives, what prophecies might they be guarding out there in the desert's endless silence? What if your destiny was written before you were born, not in words, but in dreams? In the mountains of what is now North Korea, there once lived the Yom family, healers, mystics, and according to their own records, interpreters of the night river, a stream of visions flowing from the spirit world. They claimed their line began with Yom Susong, a court physician in the Goryeo dynasty who fell into a fevered sleep for 9 days. When he awoke, he described in perfect detail the assassination of a royal prince, an event that took place exactly as he described it 3 months later. Was this divine warning, or a secret he was never meant to know? From that moment, the Yoms became obsessed with controlling dreams. They isolated themselves in a stone-walled compound high in the mountains, accessible only by a narrow bridge over a black gorge. Every child of the bloodline was put through the gongmak, closing of the eyes, a ceremony where they were blindfolded for 7 days, fed only herbal infusions of mugwort, lotus root, and powdered antler. Elders claimed the herb mixture taught the child's sleeping mind to wander freely. But if a mind wanders too far, can it always find its way back? In Yom tradition, the seers did not simply dream of the future, they wove it. Each vision had to be painted immediately upon waking, using inks mixed with ground pearl and cinnabar. Some of these paintings survive, eerie half-formed landscapes under black suns, crowds of people with no faces, rivers flowing upward into the clouds. Hidden in the patterns were cryptic characters, like messages wrapped inside the dream. But if they were messages, who were they meant for? One story from 1668 tells of Yom Hee-jin, a girl who, on the eve of her gongmak, painted a crimson bridge stretching over a sea of bones. Weeks later, the bridge to the Yom compound collapsed during a festival, killing 20 villagers. Her family saw it as proof of the gift. But some whispered that the Yoms had weakened the bridge themselves, not to fake the prophecy but to make it true. Would a family that worshipped visions stop at anything to ensure them? Japanese military archives from the early 20th century contain a strange entry: Yom family house, all doors sealed, inside 6 bodies seated upright, eyes open, in front of them paintings depicting the war in Europe. No one knows who found them or why the paintings were taken to Tokyo. Some believe the Yoms foresaw a global conflict decades before it began. Others say they died not of foresight, but of something far worse, an unending dream they could not wake from. Today, the gorge where the bridge once stood is overgrown, and the compound is in ruins. Locals say if you camp there, you'll dream of a red bridge, and if you try to cross it, you'll wake up somewhere you've never been. Could the night river still be flowing, waiting for another Yom to weave its visions? What would you trade for perfect sight, even if it meant never being able to look away? In the shadowed forests of Bohemia, the Vesely family claimed their ancestors were blessed, or cursed, with eyes that could see through the hours. The legend begins in 1421, during the Hussite Wars, when a child named Marketa Vesely was born with irises so pale they looked like frost. The midwife declared her blind. But before she could even walk, Marquetta began describing strangers before they arrived, and deaths before they occurred. By the time she was 12, entire villages came to hear her hourglass sermons. But was she seeing the future, or bending the fearful to her will? The Vesely line treated this glass sight as a sacred inheritance. To keep it pure, they intermarried with other pale-eyed cousins from nearby villages, selecting spouses based on the lightness of their gaze. Those who showed no signs of the gift were sent away to monasteries or convents, never to return. Inside the family manor, windows were covered with black curtains, not to hide from outsiders, but to keep the flow of hours from distracting young heirs. But what happens to a mind raised in darkness, told it can see more than anyone else? Diaries recovered from the late 1600s describe the mirror vigil, a rite where the next chosen heir would sit before a bowl of water mixed with crushed glass, staring until the reflections split. They were told to speak only what they saw in the broken images, be it famine, fire, or betrayal. Some screamed until their voices broke. Others whispered so softly the scribes leaned in like thieves stealing secrets. Were they truly peering into the river of time, or into the fractures of their own minds? One tale tells of Jan Vesely, who in 1794 told his family that a black carriage would come for them on the night of the first snow. His parents locked the gates for weeks, but on the appointed night, a fire broke out in the stables, killing the horses and filling the house with smoke. The only way to escape was in a black carriage owned by a neighboring noble. The family saw it as fate fulfilled. Outsiders wondered if Jan himself had set the blaze. In prophecy, is truth enough, or must it be delivered at any cost? By the 19th century, the Vesely heirs began to suffer strange ailments. Their pale eyes clouded over by 30, and some claimed they could no longer see the present. Only visions, unending, bleeding into one another. One doctor wrote, "They do not blink. They do not sleep. They live inside the hours." Those heirs often died young, found staring at nothing, with tears drying on their cheeks. Was this the toll for seeing too much, or the slow madness of inbreeding and isolation? When the last known Vesely manor was raided by Nazi occult units in 1942, soldiers reported finding a single child in the attic, a boy with milky eyes clutching a silver hourglass. He spoke in a language no one recognized. The hourglass was taken. The boy was never seen again. If the glass-eyed heirs still exist, whose hour might they be watching now? If your ancestors built empires, would you dare claim to know the hour they would fall? In the heart of West Africa, beneath the red sun and the slow winding of the Niger River, the Keita family of Mali traced their blood back to Sundiata Keita, the 13th century founder of the Mali Empire. Their lineage was royal, but their true power, they whispered, was not the throne. It was the Kafo, the mouth of tomorrow, a prophetic gift passed only to those born during a lunar eclipse. According to griots, the first lion blood oracle was Sundiata's own niece, a girl who awoke on her 12th birthday speaking in riddles that foretold the death of 2 kings and the coming of a year without rain. Was this a blessing from the ancestors, or a warning they never meant to give? For centuries, the Keitas kept the oracles hidden from the court, raising them in mud-walled compounds on the edge of the desert. These chosen heirs were trained in silence, fed only millet and goat milk, and made to sleep on lion skins. Each night, drums were beaten in a slow, unchanging rhythm until they fell into trance. Elders believed the ancestors would come in that half-dream state, whispering the fate of kings and kingdoms. But if the dead speak every night, can the living ever truly wake? One tale tells of Oracle Geneba Keita in 1637, who stood before the Munsa and declared that the river will run dry and the dust will crown a stranger. Weeks later, Tuareg raiders blocked the Niger's flow and took the capital. Her family celebrated the proof of her vision, but some accused them of leaking secrets to the raiders to make prophecy reality. Would a bloodline that worshipped accuracy cross any line to protect its name? In the 18th century, a French explorer recorded a visit to a Queta compound. He described a boy oracle with amber eyes, surrounded by carved wooden masks, reciting names in a language older than the empire itself. The boy pointed at the explorer and said, "Your shadow will return here without you." The man dismissed it, until years later his body was buried in France and his personal effects were sold to a trader in Timbuktu, where one of his hats ended up, in the Queta compound. Were the oracles merely weaving vague patterns, or were they threading exact stitches through the fabric of fate? By the 20th century, the lion blood oracles had grown scarce. Colonial powers outlawed their rites, and the lunar eclipse births became rare. Yet whispers persisted, that in the late 1960s, a Queta oracle foretold a coup months before it happened, naming the general who would take the presidency. When asked how she knew, she said only, "The lion walked into the water and the river turned to glass." Was it a vision, or a warning passed down through a network of loyal ears? Today, some Malians claim there is one living oracle, a woman in her 40s who lives under another name in Bamako. They say she keeps a lion's tooth in her pocket and wakes every night at the exact moment the moon is highest. If she still speaks the words of the mouth of tomorrow, whose destiny might she already have seen? If your visions came not in waking hours but in the deepest shadows of sleep, would you dare to close your eyes? In the highlands and cloud forests of Peru, where the mountains breathe mist into the valleys, the Ayer family claimed they were descended from the Ayer siblings of Inca legend, mythical founders whose footsteps shaped valleys and rivers. Unlike most descendants of noble lines, the Ayers did not guard their wealth or land. They guarded their dreams. For generations, they believed their bloodline carried the Inti Kori Yache, the sun's hidden knowledge, a gift that could only be reached in dreams that came during the Waka Wachui, the 3 nights when the moon disappears. Could a family truly schedule their prophecies to the calendar of the heavens? Every Ayer child was trained from the age of 5 in sleep fasting, days of sparse food and bitter coca leaves, followed by ritual sleep in a darkened chamber lined with gold leaf. The elders believed the gold reflected the sun's unseen rays into the mind, unlocking visions of the empire's future. Some woke screaming about rivers turning black. Others whispered of strangers with skin like pale maize long before Spaniards arrived. But if you saw your world's end centuries before it happened, would you try to stop it, or simply prepare your family to survive? One recorded tale from the 1500s speaks of an Ayer dreamer named Taika, who predicted the collapse of the Inca capital not in words, but by painting a mural of jaguars devouring a sun-faced king. When Pizarro's forces arrived and Atahualpa was taken, the mural was said to have been buried beneath the Ayer house. Later excavations in the 20th century claimed to have found fragments of gold leaf plaster with jaguar claws etched into them. Were these remnants of a prophecy, or an elaborate forgery to keep a family legend alive? In the 1800s, the Ayers retreated deeper into the jungle, avoiding census takers and missionaries alike. Outsiders who stumbled upon their compound described a strange practice. Dreamers slept in hammocks suspended over shallow pools of water. If a sleeper began muttering, an elder would record their words, then drop a stone into the water, breaking the reflection. They said it cut the vision before it could follow them back. But what happens when a vision refuses to be left behind? In the 1960s, a Peruvian anthropologist claimed to have stayed with the Ayers and participated in their ritual. On the second moonless night, he dreamt of a flood that carried away the entire village. Weeks later, during the rainy season, a landslide buried half the settlement. He fled before the third night, refusing to return, saying only, "They knew it would happen. They did nothing." Were the heirs passive witnesses to fate, or did their detachment come from knowing that intervention only makes the river of time run faster? Today rumors speak of one last Iyer dreamer, living in a remote village accessible only by canoe. Locals say she refuses to sleep during the moonless nights, keeping herself awake with coffee and firelight. But they whisper that she still hears the dreams scratching at the edge of her mind. If she closes her eyes again, what visions might spill into the waking world? If you could read the future in the movement of the stars, would you ever again sleep beneath them without fear? In the empty quarter of Arabia, where dunes rise and fall like frozen waves, the Al-Hakim family claimed descent from an ancient court astrologer who served the prophet's court in secret, not as a scholar of faith, but as an interpreter of fate. They believed their bloodline carried the Basar al-Gaib, the sight of the unseen, a gift to foresee calamity and opportunity alike through the constellations shifting. But unlike ordinary stargazers, they did not rely on charts or instruments. Their visions came during Samt, the silent hour, just before dawn, when the desert wind dies and even the sand seems to hold its breath. Could the stillness itself have been their portal? For centuries the Al-Hakim seers traveled under the guise of traders, carrying spices, silks, and secret knowledge. In hidden tents away from campfires, the family's chosen child, always the third born, would stand barefoot in the cold sand, staring at the star Vega until their pupils dilated to black. Elders claimed that in that darkness, patterns unfolded, telling of caravans to rob, wars to avoid, or rulers soon to fall. One chronicler recorded that in 1258, an Al-Hakim vision warned of the black flags riding from the east, just months before the Mongol siege of Baghdad. Were these visions divine warnings, or carefully gathered intelligence dressed as mysticism? The Al-Hakims became advisors to warlords and emirs, but their service always came at a price: the right to choose a bride or groom for their line from among the noble houses they served. This selective breeding, they believed, would purify the sight. Over generations their eyes became a family signature, unusually pale, with irises flecked like desert stone. But was this the mark of prophecy, or simply the echo of centuries of calculated unions? By the Ottoman era, the family's influence had grown dangerous. A letter from a pasha to the Sultan accused the Al-Hakims of seeding rebellion through whispers of fate. Yet records also show the Sultan himself summoned them before a crucial campaign, receiving a cryptic message: "The lion will win the battle but lose the hunt." The campaign succeeded militarily, but bankrupted the treasury. Had the seers predicted the outcome, or subtly manipulated decisions so it would unfold as they had spoken? In the early 20th century, British officers stationed in Arabia wrote of encountering an Al-Hakim seer who warned them not to cross a certain wadi at sunrise. They ignored him. Minutes after they began the crossing, a flash flood swept through, drowning half the horses. The surviving officer later wrote, "It was not the warning that unsettled me, it was the way he watched the water carry the bodies as if ticking off a box in his mind." Could prophecy breed not awe, but detachment? Today whispers in Riyadh and Dubai speak of a last descendant, a woman said to work as an unassuming astrologer for wealthy clients. Those who meet her say she never looks directly at you, only over your shoulder, as if checking a constellation only she can see. If her blood still carries the sight of the unseen, what events might she already be watching unfold? If your family told you that every dream you had would come true, even the nightmares, how long before you stopped sleeping at all? In the snowbound reaches of 18th century Russia, the Morozova family claimed they were descended from a blind saint who foresaw the winter of the world, a time when ice would cover the sun and all nations would starve. This prophecy was not a single event but a cycle, they believed, repeating every 3 centuries, each time heralded by a Morozova child born with white irises. When such a child appeared, the family would withdraw into their manor, sealing the windows with wax to keep the cold years out. Could fear alone shape an entire bloodline's destiny? The first recorded pale-eyed child of the modern era, Yelena Morozova, was born in 1764. From the age of 3, she spoke of fields buried under snow in midsummer, of cities where wolves prowled empty streets. Servants swore she could tell when storms were coming days in advance. At 12, she predicted the death of Catherine the Great's favorite advisor, down to the day, a prediction so precise that word reached the Empress herself. Rather than punishing the family, Catherine quietly ordered her court to consult Yelena before any winter campaign. Was this faith in prophecy, or political insurance? As the centuries turned, the Morozova visions became darker. Family records, preserved in leather-bound volumes hidden beneath the floorboards, describe dreams of red snow falling on Moscow, of entire villages vanishing in blizzards no weather almanac recorded. In 1917, as revolution swept Russia, the family's last patriarch gathered his children and whispered, "The next pale eyes will not save us. They will end us." That winter their estate was burned, and the surviving Morozovas scattered across Siberia. But if the prophecy had truly shifted from warning to doom, what could possibly cause it? In the 1970s, a Soviet folklorist claimed to have found a Morozova living under an assumed name in Irkutsk. She was an elderly woman, eyes milk white, who spoke only in riddles about melting ice and rising seas. When asked if she still had visions, she laughed and replied, "I have stopped telling them. People only try to change them, and that makes them worse." Was this resignation, or the final stage of a prophecy's curse? Locals in remote parts of Siberia still tell of a snow bride, a pale-eyed woman who appears in dreams during the first blizzard of the year. She offers you a cup of water. If you drink, you survive the winter. If you refuse, your hearth goes cold before spring. Some swear this figure is a wandering Morozova, carrying the family's gift, or burden, into the subconscious of strangers. But if a prophecy can leap from blood to dream, is anyone truly safe from it? What happens when prophecy leaves the temple, and plugs itself into the internet? The Calder family's origins are unremarkable on paper. Scottish merchants who emigrated to Canada in the late 19th century. But within family lore there's a more peculiar thread, a belief that every second-born Calder is a receiver, capable of pulling glimpses of the future from patterns no one else notices. For most of their history this meant dreams, flashes of déjà vu, and the occasional eerily accurate weather prediction. That changed in 1998. When 19-year-old Nathan Calder began building software to catch the signals in global data. Could prophecy really survive translation into code? Nathan's program, later nicknamed OracleNet by underground tech forums, scraped everything: financial markets, weather reports, shipping logs, even obscure Usenet posts. It didn't just forecast trends, it issued event markers, short cryptic lines like "The South Tower falls before noon," posted months before September 11th. While skeptics cried coincidence, others whispered that Nathan had inherited not just his family's supposed gift, but found a way to mechanize it. If the Bloodlines' foresight could now run 24 hours a day, what limits remained? The Calders treated OracleNet like an heirloom relic. Only one family member per generation had access to its full output, and they guarded it with the same secrecy medieval mystics once kept for sacred scrolls. But secrecy breeds paranoia. In 2012, a cousin leaked partial predictions to an investment firm, causing market chaos when several impossible trades paid out within hours. That cousin vanished shortly after boarding a ferry to Vancouver Island. Did the family silence their own, to protect the code? In recent years, whispers on encrypted message boards claim OracleNet has begun issuing red flag prophecies. Warnings that are less about profit and more about survival. The last autumn will have no frost. The first city drowned will not be coastal. If true, the Calder line may now be staring at something vast enough to shake even their inherited detachment. And if a bloodline that has thrived for centuries on prophecy is suddenly afraid, what exactly are they seeing? Some believe Nathan's daughter, born in 2020, will be the last receiver. Others think the Calders are already breeding for the next one, pairing DNA with machine learning in a bid to perfect foresight itself. But if prophecy can be engineered, not inherited, then are we still talking about bloodlines, or about the first generation of manufactured prophets? If every family we've met tonight truly believed they could manufacture a prophet, then where does that leave the rest of us? Across centuries and continents, the faces have changed, pale-eyed Morozovas in Siberia, desert-born Al-Hakim seers, the glassy stare of Calder coders watching their machine whisper tomorrow's headlines before they exist. They lived in castles, caravans, manors, and data centers. But their obsession was always the same, to catch a glimpse of what was coming, and to bend it into something they could use. The question is, did they succeed because of blood, or because they were willing to do what others wouldn't? Consider this. Not one of these families could prove their visions to outsiders without risking their power. The Birkenfeld heirs guarded their breeding charts like holy relics. The Argyll oracles turned marriages into calculated genetic experiments. The Morozovas locked away their pale-eyed children, convinced a single misstep would trigger an ice-bound apocalypse. They all hid behind the same defense. You wouldn't understand. But isn't that the perfect cover for self-fulfilling prophecy? If you tell someone the end is coming and they act differently because of it, did you predict it or cause it? History's dust is thick with false prophets. Street preachers crying doom. Cult leaders promising ascension. Politicians selling visions of utopia or ruin. Yet these bloodlines stand apart for one reason. They treated prophecy as an inheritance, not a performance. To them, visions weren't just divine accidents, they were traits you could sharpen, hoard, and pass on. But if foresight is something you can cultivate, what stops the rest of humanity from trying? Look at the Calders. One family member, one machine, one stream of cryptic warnings. A prophecy born in flesh, translated into numbers, amplified by algorithms. What happens when that process isn't locked inside a family but released to the world? The moment we can all see tomorrow, tomorrow itself will collapse. And maybe that's what these families have been guarding against all along. Not the chaos of ignorance, but the deeper chaos of certainty that we tell ourselves we'd use prophecy for good. To prevent disasters. To end wars. But every story in these chapters points to the same truth. The moment someone can see the future becomes a currency, and bloodlines, like dynasties, don't hoard currency to share. So when you hear rumors of an unbroken family line that just knows things, maybe the real question isn't are they telling the truth? But what are they holding back? Because if there's one thing every prophetic bloodline agrees on, it's this. The most dangerous visions aren't the ones you tell people about. They're the ones you keep to yourself. So tonight, as you switch off this story and return to your own life, ask yourself, are you sure the choices you're making are yours? Or are you already walking a path someone saw 100 years ago, a path they bred into existence long before you were born? And if they did, what's waiting at the end of it?